David Morales pacing at gate 14, Anthony Reed swapping suitcases in Atlanta. Marcus Lane pulling bags from a carousel in Miami, Tyler Shaw flashing forged boarding passes in Los Angeles. Isabella Cruz rolling a bright red suitcase through New York. 5 names, 5 airports, and 5 takedowns that unfolded in front of thousands of travelers, and every moment was caught on camera. At Chicago's bustling O'Hare International Airport, Gate 14 was packed with tired travelers waiting for delayed flights. Some sat scrolling on their phones, some leaned against their carry-ons, and others stared at the blinking departure board hoping for updates. In the middle of this ordinary chaos, one man stood out, not because of his clothes or his face, but because of how he moved. Security cameras later showed him walking in slow circles, clutching a gray backpack so tightly his knuckles turned white. He wasn't scanning for his flight number. He wasn't checking the time. He was circling the same few feet of carpet again and again, his eyes darting toward the exits more often than toward the gates. At first glance, he seemed like just another nervous passenger. Airports are filled with people who fidget, people who pace, people who look lost. But something about his pattern caught the attention of security staff monitoring the live feeds. He never glanced at a boarding pass. He never once approached the counter to ask about his flight. Most suspicious of all, every time a uniformed officer walked past, he shifted position and turned his back as though trying to shield himself from their view. Agents decided to zoom in on the backpack. It sagged heavily, the fabric stretched from whatever was packed inside. Later, when it was seized, investigators discovered that the bag didn't contain clothes or personal items at all. Instead, it was stuffed with stolen passports, dozens of them, each tucked into neat plastic sleeves. The plan, as they pieced together, was for him to deliver this cargo to another courier posing as a traveler, who would then smuggle the documents overseas. It wasn't just a petty crime, it was a carefully coordinated exchange that fed a network of forgery and identity theft spanning multiple countries. The cameras captured every tense moment leading up to the takedown. The man finally lowered himself into a seat near the gate, pretending to study his phone. He looked like any other traveler waiting to board. But when plainclothes officers quietly surrounded him, the illusion shattered. In a matter of seconds, they closed in, grabbing the backpack before he had time to react. The footage showed him startled, frozen, as other passengers looked on in confusion. Some craned their necks, whispering, while others instinctively pulled their children closer. What they were witnessing was an arrest in real time, an ordinary moment transformed into a sudden burst of action. When the bag was unzipped on site, officials didn't just find blank documents. Many of the passports bore the faces of real people who had recently reported theirs stolen. The sheer number stunned investigators, who quickly realized they had intercepted a crucial handoff. One missing courier could have meant hundreds of new identities on the black market, each capable of opening bank accounts, securing travel visas, or even slipping across borders undetected. What made the footage so striking wasn't just the crime itself, but how invisible it had seemed moments earlier. To most passengers, he was just another man killing time before a flight. Yet within minutes, the crowd realized they had been sitting beside the center of an international smuggling operation. Cameras caught the shift in their faces, the sudden recognition that something far larger had been unfolding quietly, right in front of them, disguised as ordinary travel anxiety. Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport is one of the busiest in the world, a place where tens of thousands of rolling suitcases move every hour. Among the swirl of families, business travelers, and tourists, 2 men executed a plan they thought would blend seamlessly into the noise. Cameras in the terminal cafe caught the entire maneuver. Both men arrived from opposite directions, each wheeling a nearly identical black suitcase. They never looked directly at each other, not once. Instead, they positioned themselves at nearby tables, one sipping coffee, the other pretending to check emails on his laptop. After a few minutes, they stood at the same time and casually moved toward the trash bins. The switch was simple. One man placed his suitcase down, another stepped in and picked it up. To an untrained eye, it looked like someone absent-mindedly grabbing the wrong bag. But security agents watching live feeds had been tipped off. They already knew that one of the suitcases held counterfeit currency carefully hidden behind false linings. The pair had rehearsed the act to make it appear accidental, hoping the crowd's constant movement would disguise the exchange. The first suspect, the one carrying the suitcase filled with cash, rolled it out of the cafe and toward the main escalators that led to baggage claim. He walked slowly, deliberately, as though trying not to draw attention to himself. The second suspect lingered, circling back toward the security checkpoint, his job finished once the suitcase was out of his hands. On the surface, nothing about them suggested urgency. They didn't run, they didn't whisper. They looked like any other travelers navigating the sprawling terminal. The cameras told a different story. Agents had been shadowing them for days, tracking their movements through multiple flights and airports. This cafe was the predetermined handoff point. What the smugglers didn't realize was that the suitcases themselves had been marked, tagged discreetly by investigators long before the exchange. When the man with the counterfeit-filled bag stepped onto the escalator, officers moved in. The footage captured the moment in stunning clarity, plainclothes agents suddenly surrounding him from both sides, one grabbing the suitcase handle, another placing a firm grip on his shoulder. Passengers around them froze, unsure if they were witnessing an argument, a theft, or something far more serious. The second suspect believed he had escaped. With the decoy suitcase in hand, he wandered out of the cafe and meandered through the terminal. He even stopped to buy a snack, trying to appear unhurried. What he didn't realize was that agents had been tailing him too, giving him enough room to think he was in the clear. Hours later, in the parking deck, cameras caught the quiet moment when his luck ended. Officers closed in as he reached for his car keys. The arrest was calm but decisive, the suitcase taken from him before he had time to react. Together, the footage from multiple cameras showed the fragility of the plan. What seemed smooth and clever unraveled under careful observation. The identical bags that were supposed to disguise the handoff ended up becoming the very clue that gave them away. In a sea of thousands of rolling suitcases, these stood out, not because of what they looked like, but because of how precisely they matched and how carefully the men treated them. Miami International Airport is a place where luggage never stops moving. Carousels spin almost non-stop, with travelers pressed shoulder to shoulder, eyes scanning the belts for familiar colors and tags. In that sea of motion, one man had found a way to exploit the chaos. Cameras focused on him as he lingered near a carousel that had just begun delivering bags from a flight out of New York. At first glance, nothing seemed wrong. He stood quietly like everyone else, hands in his pockets, occasionally glancing down at the stream of suitcases. Then he reached out and pulled a medium-sized black suitcase off the belt. No one questioned it. Passengers do this every few seconds. He adjusted the handle, rolled it smoothly toward the exit, and disappeared through the sliding glass doors. Within minutes, he returned, this time empty-handed, and positioned himself at the same spot by the carousel. His timing was precise. He waited until a crowd shifted, then grabbed another piece of luggage, a red hard-shell case, and repeated the same routine. Cameras showed how easily he blended back into the crowd as if nothing had happened. This cycle continued a third time. Each time, his movements were calm and deliberate. He didn't rush, didn't fumble, didn't draw attention. To the untrained eye, it looked like he was simply collecting his luggage in multiple trips, but patterns don't go unnoticed in a place wired with surveillance. By the time he reached for the fourth suitcase, security staff had already connected the dots. Reports had flooded in from distraught passengers who were left standing by the carousel with nothing to claim. The timeline matched perfectly with the man's movements. The takedown happened quickly, and the cameras caught every second, as he adjusted the handle of a large gray suitcase and began walking toward the exit. Plainclothes officers intercepted him. one positioned directly in his path, the other closing in from behind. For a split second, the man froze, realizing the smooth system he had perfected was collapsing in front of strangers. The footage showed nearby travelers pausing in confusion, some leaning over their carts to watch. Within moments, the suitcase was taken from him, and he was escorted away through a side corridor. When officers opened the trunk of his car in the parking lot, the scope of his theft became clear. It was packed with luggage, each bag stuffed with expensive clothes, electronics, jewelry, and other valuables. He hadn't targeted random flights. Investigators learned he picked high-traffic arrivals where passengers often carried luxury items from shopping trips. His plan was to sell the contents quickly and abandon the empty suitcases, knowing airlines would rarely recover the goods. The discovery shocked travelers who had lost their belongings only minutes earlier. Footage of the takedown spread quickly, showing how close they had come to losing everything for good. What made the crime striking wasn't just the theft itself, but how invisible it seemed as it unfolded. Surrounded by hundreds of people, in one of the most secure spaces imaginable, he had managed to steal repeatedly in plain sight. It was only the relentless eyes of the cameras that revealed how ordinary gestures, picking up a bag, walking toward the doors, could disguise a calculated operation. Los Angeles International Airport is a maze of terminals, gates, and corridors, a place where thousands of passengers flow through every hour. In the middle of that movement, cameras picked up a young man whose routine didn't match the rhythm of normal travel. He appeared at one gate, scanning a boarding pass, then disappeared into the crowd. Minutes later, he reappeared at a different gate, scanning the same pass again. By the third attempt, security staff were already reviewing the footage with suspicion. Something about his behavior didn't fit. Most travelers stay near their gate or check departure boards. This man floated from one area to the next, never committing to a flight, never joining a boarding line. The boarding pass itself was the first giveaway. The scanners rejected it each time, not because it was invalid in appearance, but because the electronic records didn't match. The man didn't seem flustered by the rejections. Instead, he lingered, hovering near boarding areas while pretending to be absorbed by his phone. To a casual observer, he was just another passenger killing time. But the cameras painted a different picture. His movements were calculated, his pauses deliberate. He always positioned himself where he could see luggage, carry-ons, and duty-free bags being shuffled around by real passengers. When officers finally approached, the full scope of his plan emerged. Hidden in his jacket were dozens of forged boarding passes, each printed with meticulous detail. They were convincing enough to pass a quick glance, each tied to flights he had no intention of boarding. His strategy was simple but dangerous: slip past security layers, gain access to restricted boarding zones, and use the freedom to steal merchandise or valuables. He had already taken small electronics from duty-free shops on earlier days, leaving quickly before anyone noticed. This was not his first attempt, it was the latest in a string of calculated intrusions. The takedown unfolded in silence, almost invisible to the passengers around him. As a boarding group began lining up for a late-night international flight, the man edged closer, blending with the crowd. Just as he adjusted his backpack and prepared to move with the line, agents closed in. Cameras showed the moment he was pulled aside, his face flashing from calm indifference to sudden realization. When officers searched him, the stack of forged passes spilled from his jacket pocket like a deck of cards. Each slip of paper represented a different identity, a different flight, a different opportunity to vanish into spaces he didn't belong. What startled investigators was not only the quantity of forgeries, but the quality. Many were nearly flawless, designed to mimic the tiny codes and markings of authentic tickets. Had he slipped past one distracted agent, he could have reached areas where surveillance was lighter and opportunities greater. But the cameras caught what his confidence tried to hide: the repetition, the wandering, the quiet rehearsals of a crime in progress. His downfall came not through a dramatic chase or confrontation, but through the patient watch of a system that noticed one man doing the same impossible thing boarding without ever boarding. New York's JFK Airport handles millions of travelers every year, each one pushing carts, wheeling luggage, or balancing duty-free bags on their way to connections. In that constant motion, nothing seemed unusual about the woman moving through Terminal 4. She was dressed in elegant clothing, a silk scarf draped over her shoulders, her heels clicking steadily against the floor. At her side rolled a bright red suitcase that looked more like a fashion statement than ordinary luggage. Cameras followed her calmly weaving through the crowd, pausing occasionally to check her phone as though waiting for an update on a delayed flight. To other passengers, she looked like someone with time to spare. Her appearance was part of the plan. She knew that in airports, confidence and polish often deflect suspicion. People rarely question the traveler who looks like she belongs in first class, but investigators were already watching. International authorities had flagged her passport weeks earlier after a tip suggested she was connected to a network of jewel thefts spanning Europe and South America. This trip to New York was not for vacation. Inside her suitcase was a hidden compartment lined with false panels. Behind them sat millions of dollars worth of stolen jewelry, rings, necklaces, and rare gemstones wrapped in soft cloth to silence their movement. The cameras revealed how careful she was. She avoided long lines, choosing quieter corridors where crowds thinned. She stopped at a coffee shop but ordered nothing, merely lingering at a table as if waiting for someone. Then she adjusted her suitcase handle and slowly headed toward the customs area. Her tactic was simple: claim she was on a delayed connection, act frustrated but composed, and slip through an inspection point with the crowd. For years, this method had worked in other countries. Jewelry passed hands, paperwork shifted, and by the time anyone noticed missing items, she was already gone. This time, the plan unraveled. Officers had been alerted in advance and were tracking her from the moment she stepped off the plane. The cameras captured the tightening of the circle as she approached the sliding exit doors. 2 agents waited near the threshold, while others closed in from behind. The arrest was quick, silent, and almost cinematic. One moment she was wheeling her suitcase confidently toward freedom, and the next she was surrounded. The bright red case was taken from her hand before she could protest. Passengers walking nearby slowed, puzzled, as they saw the elegant traveler suddenly escorted away. When officers opened the suitcase under controlled conditions, the secret was revealed. The false bottom lifted to expose velvet pouches filled with glittering stones. The weight explained why the suitcase, though compact, seemed heavier than expected. Each piece was catalogued, photographed, and traced back to robberies across 3 continents. The footage captured the moment investigators uncovered the hidden trove. The red case transformed from a stylish accessory into undeniable evidence. What unfolded in those minutes was the collapse of a career built on charm and deception. She had counted on blending in, on the belief that airports were too busy to notice one person among thousands. Instead, the cameras caught the exact instant her disguise failed, freezing forever the contrast between her polished exterior and the illicit fortune hidden at her side.